So you've got to start looking at alternative incomes to supplement your personal income. So if you are looking down the property line, you have to look at investment properties before you look at your own family home first, because Australia is just set up that way. You can't do it on your income.
One of my relatives who is in the real estate market has been his whole career is visiting here in Australia. Okay. And I caught up with him after 17 years yesterday. And he was telling me there's been a huge slowdown in the US home sales market. And that has been bigger than they expected, dropping to the slowest pace since 2009. And he said it's almost going back to the whole global financial crisis.
Exactly right. You just hit that date.
Panic buyers are bailing. Sales of existing home have slid 5.9% from February in the month of March to an annual rate of 4.02 million. And that's, there's a lot of people in the US, as we just highlighted. Mm-hmm. That turnover is really needed. And the areas that are really being hit, 5 metro areas, 3 in Florida, 2 in Arizona. He sells in Arizona, funny enough. But he's saying it's not just happening there, it's also happening in other parts of the United States across the country there. They're concerned that they might be getting to a bit of a housing market crash like it did in this current market.
Sure.
But this is a thing, because I think it's more uncertainty at the moment, and people aren't quite knowing.
Just lack of confidence?
Yeah, like investors get nervous when markets are shaky and try to go to safe assets, as they call them, and park their money there. I think this is what it's still fresh in the minds of so many people of what happened in the global financial crisis and that whole thing. You've got to understand that the market's very different now. Those who are on selling bad mortgage payments and doing that as a financial product in the game. But if there is a slowdown in the economy, people are going, do I want that bigger loan? Do I want to upsize right now? They go through those kind of mechanical questions. And where is this whole tariff thing going to go to? That's playing, I think, in a lot of the market's mind at the moment.
Oh, no doubt about it. I mean, look, there's a seismic change in the whole US economy. It really is. This is not a little tweaking here and there. America's being seen differently by the rest of the world. And obviously, well, it's actually interesting from that point of view, because, generally speaking, and I don't want to come across harsh here, but America very much exists in its mind. A lot of Americans kind of exist on their own. They don't think about the worldwide market. So this is an interesting thing from my point of view of, they are seeing that instability, I guess.
They are. Let's have a look at what J.D. Vance has said recently about the whole housing situation.
I have to say, I'm hard-pressed to think of a time in my 40 years of life where it's been so hard for normal American citizens to afford a home. Even renting a home has become a challenge, or worse yet, fallen completely out of reach for so many of our families. I was talking with a relative a couple of years ago, and she just made kind of an offhanded observation. As a younger person than I am, she was looking to buy her first home and just mentioned that when her parents were growing up, they could afford a nice home on a single middle-class income. And she was sort of mentioning this as a sorrowful thing. She was sad that wasn't true for her generation. And I think all of us in this room, certainly including me, have a little bit more work to do, I think, to make housing more affordable. And I want to talk about that because I think it's the issue where our interests in some ways are most aligned with the people in this room. I read recently that the average income it takes to buy a new house is nearly 2 times the average salary of your typical American family. Not the average American worker, but the combined incomes of a husband and wife. And that's just not acceptable or sustainable in the United States of America. We want Americans to be able to afford the American dream of home ownership, because we know that when people own their homes, it makes them a stakeholder. It makes them a stakeholder in their neighborhoods, in their cities, and ultimately, of course, in this country that all of us love so much.
So what's interesting about this is the median house price for the United States is $403,700 US.
Okay.
Now, that's really fascinating when you compare it to Australia's median house price now of $976,800. Now, of course, Sydney skews that quite a bit with 1.2 million. But if you look at places like we are in Perth, it's now the average Perth price is $1.125 million to buy a home.
Yeah, look, I've got friends trying to buy a home at the moment, and they're not getting a look in. It's crazy. It's just... I saw some figures the other day about the fact that 30 in the mid 90s, effectively a house in Australia was about 2.5 years of your income. Right now, I think that the figure was thrown at me now. Is it 16 times? That is inconceivable. So the two-family, the two-income household is obviously essential. Otherwise, you're not going to go anywhere. And how bad is this for families? Because that way, your kids are having to be raised at daycare. Disgraceful.
Yeah, and not just that, but is mum and dad going to have to give them a loan when it's time for them to leave the nest?
Yeah,
that's what we've got to consider here too, and it's ridiculous. I mean, look, we always talk about it. I know that it's all controlled. We all know that if they release more land here in Australia, that would release a lot of the prices. It's also been skewed lately with the immigration that's been going on in this country, and needs a breather to kind of catch up with the numbers that have been coming in. But you've got to go, how long is this going to last? Is it sustainable? So interesting times as far as the Australian market is concerned.
But what about, with all negative gearing and all of that sort of thing, has over the last sort of 25 years, has just making money out of property as an investment, has that just become so much the priority and not people, not families? Is that?
I think it's a very controlled market. That's where I think the increase, a lot of it has come from. Artificially boosted, obviously, by the numbers of 1.5 million immigrants coming over in the last 2 years without the housing infrastructure, and that's what's been the last boost. But I think prior to that, I mean, there's so much control in releasing land in this country because they want them all on the sewage, they want them all on the system, and they don't want to do that. They want them paying the rates and the council rates, etc. That's what I call the Babylonian system. They want them designed there. They don't want freestanding properties out in the middle of nowhere. No. You look at the estates. We have really modelled from the 80s the estate model of the housing. So you go in, they've got all the beautiful parklands, they reduce your own backyard, and you enjoy this shared space amongst everyone. We'll look after it for you. You don't have to worry about that. And what typically happens is you are actually paying for all of that.
Of course you are.
You don't. It doesn't look like it at face value, but you actually do pay for that. And what's going on in that space is, of course, they're insisting on this beautiful. They've even doubled down recently times. You've got to have a great parkland. You got to spend $1 million just on the playground for the children to do that. What inevitably happens after, and this just throws the property prices right up there, skyrockets. And look, it looks pretty and all that, but if you had people who had houses further out from the CBD and highways and this sort of stuff, that would drastically reduce the price of housing. But they don't want that with the whole 15-minute city push. Now, if you look at how those estates actually go, after 10, 15 years, you've got families moving in, but they're all empty nesters. So they go through the phase of, the kids. Then you've got all the cars, 7 cars parked outside the front, depending on how many children they've had. They go through that stage. Then they get married, and you've got couples in there who have got these massive houses that they brought the children up, and they're empty now. And so with an aging population that we've had, they've tried to fix that problem, of course, with immigration and bringing people in. So it's a real interesting sort of dichotomy in terms of managing, what kind of houses do we need in Australia? Do we need to revisit that, rethink it? It's interesting. Bustleton is a really interesting case study as far as real estate's concerned right now. That used to be the Sleepy Hollow where they kept the Christmas lights on up all year long and never brought them down for Christmas time after Christmas time. I don't know if you ever went down.
No,
I've grown up going there since the 70s, right? So it was a real Sleepy Hollow. But what they've done is they brought in an international airport in the last few years. And now people can go there, and it's not just on holidays, it's the FIFO experience of flying in, flying out. Now, there's part of me that doesn't like that because now Bustleton is not the Sleepy Hollow tourist resort you used to go to anymore. But it's become very metropolitan. They've got so much development going on the foreshore. And I've always said, why is always the emphasis on Perth? We've got to look at developing things. So you can fly now from Bustleton to Melbourne and Sydney direct.
Yes, right? I know.
Whereas you can do that, and they're going to roll that out to Singapore now.
Are they really?
I'm going, look, this is kind of the model they've had in the United States where, look at California, you've got San Francisco, Los Angeles, all these regionals, big cities that are international airports, international access, takes the pressure in terms of the infrastructure off and allows better pricing of homes for
better pricing of homes is the big issue here. I mean, I've literally got friends who are down Bustleton, Bunbury Way who are FIFO. Okay, they're living that lifestyle, and yeah, they've actually set themselves up that way. Even a little bit out, maybe Donnybrook, those kind of spots, which aren't that far, so they can transport themselves to the airport and off they go.
And you think about it, like Western Australia is 1/3 of the size, just land size and mass alone.
Yep.
We're 1/3 size of the United States. We forget that sometimes. We're one state.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
We're 1/3 of the United States, so it's not like we're short of land.
No. Travis, your thoughts there?
I was trying to stay quiet on a few things. First of all, let's jump back onto negative gearing. Negative gearing, everyone blows it out of the water. I think negative gearing has received the short end of the stick when it comes to housing affordability. It wasn't negative gearing that blew the cost of housing out of the water. It was the first homeowners grant. It was a great idea during the 2008 where everyone needed help to get into houses. We need to stimulate the economy. We just took it way too far. You chuck any subsidies like that upfront money into it, or building developers don't do. It's like, oh, $10,000, no worries. Instead of being a $300,000 house, it's now a $310,000 house.
Right.
So you're just giving money to developers. That's just overly inflated the cost of houses, and it's been going on for too long. So first homeowners grant should have been wound back ages ago. The biggest difference, and I'm doing a lot of research in America because we're actually looking to start purchasing some investment properties in America at the moment. So the American market, it's really hard to compare the American market to the Australian market because so much of our population is centered around capital cities. So we've got have this, if you look purely at the capital cities, there's a massive overpopulation, not compared to things like Havana and like all these other, like, or Vietnam, for example. I think there's like 16 million people in a place the size of Perth in Halong, where we are at the moment. But what happens is you can travel 3 hours from the capital city and still have all the amenities that the capital city has, and that happens every 3 hours through the whole entire country, even through the regional areas. So, like, for example, in New York State, there's a town called Potsdam. Its population is all of 5,000 people. It's a bit of a touristy destination because it's really close to the border between Canada and America. But within an hour and a half, you got Fort Drum with a population of 45,000 people, and you literally have the same facilities at Fort Drum as what you do in Detroit. So it's one of those things where there's amenities all over America. So when people turn around, like, the average house price is like $400,000 in America, whatever it is. So move out an hour and you can buy a house for $20,000.
Is it that stark? The difference that big?
It is. It's insane. The other thing you got to remember, we build brick and tile houses. 99% of houses in America are timber frame houses. They can build a house in 2 weeks. It's not that expensive to demolish a house and rebuild it again. So especially and a lot of the states have really, really lax building codes. Alaska, they have a loose, I'm going to say, guideline of building regulations. It's not regulated at all. You know when you see all those videos where doors are like on the piss and like they're just doing really weird shit? That's Alaska. Through and through. There's no permits, there's no inspections. It just doesn't matter. You build whatever you want, and that it shows in the value of houses. So the other one is buying your first home, like, to live in, is kind of like a fallacy in Australia now. It just doesn't work unless you've got both yourself and your partner have extremely high-end paying jobs. I'm talking financial planners, high-end accountants, doctors, lawyers, teacher that's been in the industry for a few years. Like, if you want to do that in your 20s, it's not going to happen. So you've got to start looking at alternative incomes to supplement your personal income. So if you are looking down the property line, you have to look at investment properties before you look at your own family home first, because Australia is just set up that way. You can't do it just on your income. You need alternative income streams to assist. It's just impossible.
You're right. Yeah, look, I've got 2 friends who have just bought their first home together in their, well, it's frightening, but they're in their early 40s, right? Okay, and they both have high incomes.
I had a look at this place in Camillo. So that was between $750 and $800. I'm not going to say the exact figure because it's actually, well, if you can Google it, it tells you how much we sold it for. The rental on that was $1,100 a week.
No way.
And that was like South Perth. That was an hour out of the city. So because I had the granny flat out the back, there was a combined rental was $1,100 a week. So that's $50,000 a year, plus, because the council rates were over $3,000 a month. You got all your, so our water consumption was about $40 for every 2 months.
I'm with you on that one.
But our services was $160 for 2 months. So our service connection fee was nearly triple what our actual consumption was.
Yeah.
So it's gotten to the point where the housing market in Australia isn't for houses for you to live in. You've got to buy 2 or 3 houses before you buy the house that you live in.
Well, that kind of comes back to what my argument before. My point was about the fact that housing's just become more of an investment for those who have got wealth, and they're trying to play the tax and all kind of thing. And I'm not against that, obviously, but I am against it from the point of view that there needs to be better regulation, so that, because fundamentally we all need a roof over our heads, we all need a home where we can raise a family, and I don't think it's unreasonable for an Australian family to want to, and I take your point about being further out and all of that. I get all of that, but it is not unreasonable for an Australian family to want their own home.
Yes, no, absolutely 100% agree with you. It's just the government has gone, it's not the property investors that have done this. They're just buying what's available or what's there to support them as much as they can. The rules and regulations have been set by the government over the last 20, 30 years. This is the situation due to poor policy. So I hate it when people turn around and go, the latest one, they want to try and start forcing retirees out of their home so a family can move in. It's like, no, it's their house. They can do whatever the hell they want with it. So what happens if one of their family members all of a sudden goes through a divorce or something like that, and they need a home and they need to move back in with the family? Like, I know my grandfather and grandmother, so Nana and Pop, there's 2 of them. They're in a 3-bedroom townhouse. You ask them to downsize to a 1-bedroom room, and Pop will tell you to go get stuffed because Auntie Chris has been over. It's like all the people that have come visit. So Auntie Chris and Uncle Frank have just spent, I think, about 4 or 5 weeks in Australia. They're from Sweden. So, no, come stay with Nana and Pop.
Well,
so I hated the government getting involved in that.
The Greens right now are proposing pretty much if you have a 4-bedroom house and you're only using one of the bedrooms, that you should be able to let, immigrants use the other 3. I mean, honestly, like, where does this – it's just – we live in a very, very strange time.
Yeah, the government just needs to get out of everyone's house, out of their bedrooms, out of their full stop, and just start allowing people to do what they need to do. Like the amount of regulations when it comes to subdividing property. So we were originally looking at subdividing, but to do just the subdivision, I think the quote from the lawyer was nearly $60,000 just for the paperwork. That's not including getting the subdivision done and getting the paperwork through the government. That's just to get it ready. So it's getting to the point where it's just, why would you do it? It just doesn't make sense why you do all of it.